According to the World Bank, 90 to 100 million more people are now being pushed into poverty. Today, President Obama emphasized the importance of developed countries meeting their promises to alleviate climate change in a way that lessens the economic and the social effect of floods and other natural disasters in developing countries. I sat down with British Secretary of State for International Development Douglas Alexander to ask him what commitments are needed.
There's a responsibility on individuals as consumers, there's a responsibility on companies, but of course there's also a heavy burden of responsibility on government. And I think the real opportunity for Copenhagen, and that's why this week's meeting here in New York is so key to the preparations for Copenhagen, is to create a framework in which businesses can have a clear line of sight. They can make investment decisions informed with a degree of confidence about carbon prices into the future, about the necessary investments. Part of the responsibility on politicians is to agree that framework in Copenhagen, but also communicate robustly that there are real business opportunities from addressing this challenge of climate change if we're smart in the way we go about it.
Does that mean that Europe, in particular the UK, will be footing part of that bill to help the developing world achieve that?
Well, we recognise that there are several key elements to a deal in Copenhagen. There needs to be the diffusion of technology transfer, which is going to be important if we're going to have low-carbon technologies cascading out across the developing world. There also needs to be significant changes in terms of the actions of developed countries, but also, yes, significant additional new financing for developing countries. That's why, as the British government, we were the first government anywhere in the world back in June to put some numbers on the table. Our Prime Minister, Gordon Brown, estimated that about $100 billion a year would be needed for a global deal to provide the level of financing that we think will be necessary. And obviously, as part of that much wider deal, which encompasses both public and private money, the United Kingdom will be making a contribution.
Well, Secretary Alexander is also a chief strategist of Britain's Labour Party. I asked him, given how low approval ratings are right now of Prime Minister Gordon Brown, what his outlook is for the upcoming election.
It was just 5 months ago that Gordon Brown brought world leaders together in London for the G20 summit. The next summit, of course, takes place on Thursday in Pittsburgh. And I don't think there was anybody better qualified both to understand or respond to the scale of the global crisis that we were facing 5 months ago and which we continue to need to face working together. I think Gordon has the experience, the understanding to chart a way forward to secure the recovery for the British people. And I think in contrast, the Conservatives are struggling to recognise that the approach that they've taken, that government is always the problem and never the answer, that the only kind of good regulation is non-regulation, that you can privatise, nudge or deregulate your way out of every problem, really doesn't offer solutions to the kind of post-crisis politics that we're now facing in the United Kingdom. I think people do want a government that doesn't walk by on the other side, but stands with them and supports them during the tough economic times and builds for the future. And that's been the cause and the experience that Gordon has brought to that task for many years.
When you hear a poll that says half of British voters prefer leadership other than Brown, support for Labour is at 27%. At this point in the election cycle, that doesn't cause you concern?
My sense is the last year has been dominated in Britain by the economic recession and the consequences of the global downturn. My sense is that over the coming months, our opportunity, indeed our responsibility as Labour, is to reframe the debate to say, let's understand this crisis, but let's understand how Britain can come through this crisis. I think when the question is focused on who has the best answers to the challenges that the people of Britain are facing today, then I think the race will become more competitive and I think we'll be judged to have better answers. But we've got a job of work on our hands. I don't deny it. It's difficult, but it's definitely doable.
As British Secretary of State for International Development Douglas Alexander here in New York for the United Nations meeting.